Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Big Easy Sports Talk podcast. I'm Nick Garisco, and I'm joined by Pelicans and NBA analyst Michael Pelicans and our podcast's producer, Jonathan Dixon. We have a tripod here, the three people responsible for the Big Easy Sports Talk podcast. And we've been covering the Pelicans well over the last 3 weeks throughout the lottery results, Zion Williamson, the Anthony Davis trade, and the NBA draft. And we're going to keep the good basketball times rolling here in New Orleans because next up is NBA free agency. And that tips off this Sunday afternoon officially. And in today's episode, we're going to be providing a Pelicans preview of NBA free agency. So I'm really excited about that. Again, we have Jonathan Dixon and Michael Pelicans here. As always, before we get started, if you like what you hear today, you can become one of our best friends by subscribing to this podcast and give us a great rating on iTunes. And you can also follow us on all social media at Best Podcast NOLA. Guys, we've got Zion Williamson. We've got Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, even Josh Hart from the trade. We have Jrue Holiday. What do y'all think is the Pelicans' primary objective here in free agency this offseason from a philosophical standpoint?
I think the main thing is they want to get vets. That's something that they've talked about for some time. They don't want to have a locker room with just a ton of young people and no one to sort of guide them. That's one of the main reasons they're keeping Jrue around, because Jrue is probably not going to fit with their timeline for contending. He's someone who can take a lot of pressure off the younger guys, someone who can guide them along the way, and ultimately someone who can help put them in position to succeed instead of starting sort of what Philadelphia had several years ago, where you just had so many young guys on the same team. They were terrible, and they're trying to create some sort of winning culture here, and I think they'll probably wind up addressing most of their veteran needs through free agency.
Michael, do you think that we're looking for long-term deals or short-term deals, and do you think we're looking for any superstars, or do you think we're going to be more low-key here?
I don't think they would have made they would have made the trade to trade down, but I think getting Solomon Hill off of our books was a big deal because that freed up about 10 or 11 million in cap room. So I think they intend on using it. I would hope that they will stay away from four-year deals. I don't think that's a wise thing to be doing at this point. If it's a player who's young enough and who seems like he has a high ceiling, I can understand it. But I think the worst thing that you could do right now is lock yourself into any sort of player who might wind up hamstringing your flexibility 3 or 4 years down the road. I think that if you look at the market right now, I think they will try to make a splash. I don't think they would necessarily go after someone like Jimmy Butler or Kawhi or any of those guys, and I don't think they would have any grounds to, because I don't think any of those players would have any interest. But I think you might see some movement towards someone like Tobias Harris or Al Horford or players of that caliber who are very good but aren't quite superstars.
I hear you. And so this is more of a long rebuild that we're looking here, and you're basically saying that you don't want these guys we don't really know how they're going to be with Zion Williamson yet. And the Pelicans, we're trying to win now, of course, but in terms of winning a championship, that might be further down the road, and you don't want to sign guys to long terms that you might end up regretting.
Yes, exactly.
So our producer here, Jonathan Dixon, did a great job today kind of formulating a list here of free agents, and he was able to filter it so where it excludes superstars like Kawhi Leonard and Jimmy Butler and Kevin Durant, guys that we just don't envision the Pelicans going for. And like you mentioned, they don't necessarily want to be New Orleans Pelicans right now. Hopefully we can change that in the future. But we're going to go through this list today and just kind of – these are all recognizable names from most basketball fans' perspective. So I'm interested to see if y'all think some of these mid-tier range free agents are going to fit with the New Orleans Pelicans. And I just want to hear about them from their skill perspective, what they could bring to the Pelicans. And ultimately, I want to hear from both of y'all whether you think they are good fits here or not. So let's start with Al Horford. Michael, what are your thoughts on Al Horford? Because he kind of surprised a lot of people by declining that option. I think he could have stayed for $30 million or something like that in Boston, and now he's a free agent. But he's a little long in the tooth, right? So I think he's 33 years old. So what do we expect out of Al Horford going into this season? And do you think he's a good fit with the Pelicans?
I think he declined that player option because of the timing of it. He's a guy who's already 33 years old, and I think he's probably looking for his last big payday, and it's a whole lot easier to do that while he's still productive. I would guess the Pelicans would have some level of interest, but he might command more years than the Pelicans are willing to give. You could convince me that having him around for 4 years would be something that might be beneficial because he would at least help us to mentor our younger players. We have a guy in Jackson Hayes who's very, very raw and could certainly use some guidance. I don't know if that merits getting someone for 4 years, and that would be my hesitation, is that he's a good enough player and there's enough cap space out there that someone else with a better offer might surface. And I think ultimately I'm not really willing to commit to a 4-year deal. And if that is what he commands, I don't think it's the right move for the Pelicans.
Yeah, Michael, I actually agree with you here. You know, when Al Horford's name first popped out at me, I thought, you know, this might be a good guy. He's very tenured. He's been on pretty much a playoff team every single year that he's been in the league. So you kind of want a guy like that to help mentor somebody like Zion Williamson. But, I mean, he's a good stretch 4 or 5 guy. He gets a lot of offensive rebounds, and he can also take people away from the inside, allowing people to kind of drive in and kick out to him. So I think he's a good asset, like you were saying, but the money's just not right for the Pelicans, even though he is a guy that we could, you know, rely on as a, you know, kind of a mentor to not just him, but guys like Josh Hart, Brandon Ingram, and guys like that. But definitely the money is just, you know, it's too much here.
Yeah, and the next guy on the list is DeAndre Jordan here. And DeAndre Jordan kind of, I wouldn't say mimics, but you could make the argument, Michael, you used the term mentor for Al Horford. DeAndre Jordan, even though he's not as much of a savvy vet as Horford is, DeAndre Jordan's game kind of matches up to what Jackson Hayes may be in the future, a little more than Horford, I would say. Is there any way that the Pelicans would make a DeAndre Jordan splash? Or, again, is that kind of just out of our price range right now and not really necessary?
I mean, I think we could afford most of the people on this list, but I think DeAndre Jordan would be one that would make the least sense. You're correct. So I'd say that, so Jackson Hayes, in terms of what he could develop into, I don't think DeAndre Jordan is the worst comparison. And he certainly, at least at this juncture, seems to be much more, Jackson Hayes seems to be a lot more like DeAndre Jordan than he does Al Horford. But I don't know what DeAndre Jordan has to teach him besides being just a freak athlete, as much as that I don't find him to be a particularly smart player. And that's okay because he's such a phenomenal athlete. And but I don't think that in terms of mentoring or anything like that, it would be anywhere near the value that would be worth paying him something like that, especially as he's already 31 years old.
Yeah, I actually agree again with Michael. I think he costs quite a bit of money, and I don't think he really fits into that mentorship role as much as Al Horford would, but he is cheaper. I know that his play is declining just a bit, so, you know, I definitely wouldn't want to pick him up unless it's at a really good deal and we can kind of fit him in being even more athletic than we already are for the Pelicans. But, yeah, I would pass on this too. And just so if anybody's listening here to this list and kind of seeing, you know, how is this formulated, we're going by last year's actual salaries and kind of going from the very top and lowering and going down and down and down. So as we get to the very bottom of this list, you're going to see guys who might seem more suitable for the cap space that we have. So, Nick, who's the next guy on our list here?
Yeah, right. Like Panaman's saying right now, it's this isn't a list of the top available prospects, and it's kind of jumbled up, but it's all based on salary last year. But we're going to get through all these guys here. The next name on the list is Jabari Parker, and he's been an interesting, a little overrated, I would say. And he came out of college. A lot of people were expecting him to do or play really well, and now he's more of an offensive scorer, if anything, but he's also very inefficient. So he doesn't really provide much. I don't see the Pelicans going after a guy like Jabari Parker with all the new movements that they've made and the emphasis on versatility. Do you guys disagree with that?
No, I agree. I don't think Jabari Parker is someone that I would take that risk on. I think there's a real danger of saying that someone will never develop into a player that they were billed to be coming out of college. Sometimes guys take several years to figure it out. But as far as Jabari Parker goes, obviously there's some sort of injury context there. but I just don't think that he's that great of a basketball player. I think he's someone who looks good when he does things well. It is, but I think he's someone who looks good when he does things well, and I think because he can score, I think he gets a pass in certain areas, but I think ultimately he's not really that good of a basketball player, and I think if you're going to take a risk on someone, it's not necessarily that he'll never pan out, but rather that there are more optimal risks given what's available.
Yeah, and if you guys remember, he was a high draft pick by Milwaukee. He was supposed to be the face of that team, and Giannis kind of just took over that role, and everybody pretty much forgot about Jabari Parker. And then he kind of goes to Chicago, and then he's traded away after that. So his stock is really gone down. I mean, he's also had two season-ending injuries already in his young career. So he's already got the injuries. It looks like he's he's going to be worth not a max dollar amount, but he's going to be up there. So definitely not worth it here, even if it's Pelicans or anyone else that I'd be looking at.
Yeah, he still only is 24 years old, so he's got a chance to turn things around, but I'd rather him do that on another team rather than us take the risk. Trevor Ariza is an interesting name because he's been around the block, of course, and he's a good defender, and he gets a decent 3-and-D guy, but again, he is 34 years old. You can make the argument about being a mentor and a savvy vet, but is this someone that the Pelicans could want to bring in?
I think it's conceivable. I think Ariza, first of all, that guy has been everywhere in his career and has been on a lot of winning teams. Someone who also sort of reinvented his game. He was really just a freak athlete coming into the league with not much of a shot. He's one of the guys who sort of had the greatest benefit from figuring out in the corner of three-ball revolution because he's not that good of a shooter, but he sort of reinvented his game by just basically sitting in corners because it's 2 feet shorter than the regular three and canning those at a more efficient rate than he was accustomed to. So I think he's someone that makes some sense. He's not someone that really, moves the needle a whole lot in terms of your short-term wins, but I do think and he's not someone who excites me to the extent that I think he would be the best mentor available or anything like that, but I do think he's a solid veteran, actual locker room presence, and I think he would make some sense if he's on a reasonable price tag.
Yeah, and I think another thing, if you haven't thought of this already, he was on the Rockets team that really went from basically dead last to when they brought him aboard, they really shot up, and he's one of the big reasons why they almost beat out the Golden State Warriors a few years ago to go to the championship. So, he could work in a system like that where he's kind of the non-superstar in a superstar team, maybe like if LA gets Kawhi or something like that, where he can kind of fill in that 3-and-D role. But on the Pelicans, it doesn't really make any sense unless they're filled with superstars, and he's kind of that other guy to help on 3-and-D.
Right. I imagine Ariza to be the type of player who is – because when the Lakers, maybe they get a third star, maybe they don't. But either way, they have LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and he seems like the type of player who's going to go to a team like the Warriors or the Lakers who's trying to win, kind of a ring chaser, I guess, on a veteran minimum salary, just because he's been around the block so often. At this point, he probably has millions of dollars in the bank, and he just wants to get that last chance at a ring.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some truth to that. He's certainly been someone who's been on a lot of successful teams. I don't think that's necessarily the only role he could possibly do. And I think also sometimes what you'll see an overpay to get a guy like this who, despite having a whole lot of money, these people still want money. This is still, as much as a lot of these players have so much money they can retire today, there are some players where you'll see an overpay on a team where they don't get a chance to win. And ultimately there's only so many roster spots on a winning team anyway. So I think there's definitely some truth to the fact that he might be targeting a better destination than what we have. But I do think that if he is interested whatsoever in our destination, I think that would make some sense to sort of spin the wheels.
Yeah, as long as it's a short-term deal. He is kind of getting up there in age, though. But the next guy on this list, Tobias Harris. Now, this is a popular name going around in NBA circles right now, especially from a lot of Pelicans fans are making some noise about maybe wanting to sign Tobias Harris. I think he's one of these guys who is He's obviously a good scorer, of course, and he played for the 76ers last year. And, he kind of made a name for himself on the Clippers here. But this is kind of one of those guys where a lot of the Pelicans fans really want him because they think we can be really competitive, not win a championship with him immediately, but be really competitive because he's kind of a borderline, I wouldn't say all-star. He's more like an equivalent of like a Pro Bowl player, And I think he's a very talented player, but that doesn't mean he makes sense for us, right? Is Tobias Harris is somebody you want to invest in?
No, actually I don't. And I think this is one of the ones that I would probably disagree with a lot of the common sentiment. There's been a lot of interest in him, and I don't think that it's necessarily wrong to be interested. My sort of argument against Tobias Harris and really any high-usage player is that I think it's really important to give guys like Zion and Brandon Ingram looks. And I think if you put too many scoring options alongside them, I don't think they get the kind of opportunities that you would want for them. I think that also it's probably smart to note that typically, if you have a really, really budding superstar, you don't trade him. And Tobias Harris has been traded several times early in his career, and that doesn't mean that he's not a good player. But typically, unless there's some sort of superstars trade, and again, so Philly acquired him because they wanted to make a leap towards a championship. Typically, if you're that good, if you're going to be that great of a player, you're going to command a way bigger haul than what Tobias Harris has commanded, and that's indicative of the fact that as much as he is a really good scorer, a really good shooter, he's probably a little bit overrated in terms of what people think about him.
Good point.
Yeah, I'm pretty much almost on the same point as you. I listened earlier this morning to Jake Madison's Locked On Pelicans podcast, and he actually talked about him specifically for Tobias Harris, talking about how his usage rate was at about 21%, and that's kind of a lower than other people who would be kind of at his range. So if you're thinking about if he's kind of a guy you wouldn't want to bring in because he's not, he's going to take up too much or ask for too many shots or anything like that, I think that argument kind of goes out just a little bit just because he's willing to kind of, spread just like he had Jimmy Butler and Embiid and Ben Simmons to kind of let them hold the show going on. But
those are some ball hogs, though.
Yeah.
The Pelicans don't have players like that. I would counter with the idea that Tobias Harris might feel like he needs to be more of a ball hog because I think when enough needs to be said when you have Jimmy Butler, Embiid, and especially Ben Simmons, who are definitely going to handle the ball a lot.
Right, and I think that is the other argument too, is that because we have somebody like a Zion instead of like an Embiid or Simmons, that he may feel the need to be that guy instead of being, being the Robin instead of the Batman. So I think that's a very good point too.
I think a lot of Pelicans fans initially wanted Tobias Harris when they thought of the idea, but now, kind of like you, Piano Man, here, I think it's not that they're souring on the idea. It's more they're just a little more hesitant because more Pelicans fans are starting to realize that, hey, maybe we should be patient here. I know we want to win now, and I know Tobias Harris probably helps us, get a few more wins in the win column now more than these other players on this list do. But at the same time, this is a long rebuild, and if it affects players' development, Ingram, Lonzo, Zion, of course, then, maybe it's something we need to consider there. So I like that y'all, didn't take the mainstream route there, and you're, a very quality NBA player, arguably a top 40 NBA player maybe, in terms of overall talent, is available, and you're all saying, no, I don't want, I don't really know if I want him or not. So I kind of like that y'all are going against the grain there. The next player on this list is Robin Lopez, not to be confused with Brooke Lopez, the better brother. What do y'all think about Robin Lopez coming to the New Orleans Pelicans?
I really liked him during his time here, and actually at one of the few times I had gone to Media Day, he was a really, really fun person to be around. Someone who's really, really smart, really, really funny, and ultimately a guy who is sort of fits the mold of someone who you would overpay for his veteran presence. He comes in, he doesn't need 30 minutes a night. He's someone who works hard. He's a better player than he's probably given credit for because he's been on so many bad teams, but he's someone who is still a good defender, probably a little bit antiquated in terms of today's NBA. He's got a better offensive post game than people give him credit for. But again, you're not putting him on your team because you want to win 55 games. You're putting him on the team because he's someone who can teach your younger players how to work hard, how to play the game. And again, he's a very, very bright guy. And I think of this list, he's one of the top guys that I'd have for his mentorship.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why you would fit him in rather than have somebody like a Horford or DeAndre Jordan is that he's going to be a lot cheaper. He's already played here before. He kind of knows a bit of our system. And he can be that leadership role guy at a cheaper rate. So while he's not as quality of a player, he's going to fit both into New Orleans. He's going to be in the right price range. I think chemistry-wise, he'd help us. He's not going to win us a whole lot of games, like you would say. But I think given the price value and the chemistry and mentorship, this is sort of in that middle range where you kind of want to be hitting at.
All right. Yeah, well, I didn't see that answer coming from both of y'all, and I hope that we're able to get somebody signing Robin Lopez is fine, but I'm hoping that we're able to bring in a little more talent than that along with him if we choose to go that route. What about Jared Dudley? I mean, he kind of made a name for himself in the playoffs this season when he got into some spats with Ben Simmons of the 76ers in that series right there. So Jared Dudley, interesting guy because he's a veteran, but he's gone in and out of spurts in his career where he's just been either irrelevant or sometimes relevant. So what do y'all think about Dudley now that he's 34? And do you think he kind of fits that Robin Lopez mentorship mold?
Yeah, actually, it was interesting that they wind up being back-to-back because these are the two guys that I've been tweeting about for a while that I would want on my team. Jared Dudley is someone who, if you listen to the Low Post, it was probably a few years ago when Jason Kidd was over there, he actually tasked Jared Dudley with sort of mentoring Giannis. And Giannis is who he is because of his athletic profile and work ethic, certainly not just because of Jared Dudley, but I think you can look no further than Jared Dudley given this podcast. I mean, again, this is not stuff that I'm out of my own mouth. This is stuff outside of, like, basically that sort of locker room was that Jared Dudley was a huge presence in helping Giannis, someone who's pretty slow at this stage of his career, really more of a 4 than a 3, an undersized 4 at that, but someone who I think has a reputation as someone who will wind up being an NBA front office one day because of the way he sees the game. So, again, kind of like Lopez, You're not paying him for production, you're paying him to be a part of your culture and someone that I would be interested in.
Yeah, he fits that mold just like Lopez does. Kind of the same type of deal with him, but he's plays a different position, whether that is at the small forward, maybe in a small ball power forward mode. But he, one of the things that he talked about when asked about, where he would like to go in free agency, he's like, 2 of the last 3 teams that I've played for, I've played a big mentor role and not so much as an actual on-the-court player. So Giannis obviously being the guy, just like Michael said, kind of helping him come along into his own existence. And then the other guy is actually D'Angelo Russell, who was kind of cast off from L.A. over to Brooklyn, kind of thinking that he just wasn't going to be as good as he was supposed to be. So Jared Dudley definitely helped somebody like a D'Angelo Russell, who all of a sudden just became an all-star. It doesn't mean that Jared Dudley had 100% an effect on him, but if you're seeing this from Giannis, you're seeing this from D'Angelo Russell, this is the perfect guy that specifically for Zion that I'd like to bring on board to help him personally.
Yeah, he seems like... Yeah, I could see that for sure. But in that quote, it has me a little worried there. Was he trying to say that he wants more playing time this time, or was he just kind of answering with, a statement saying that he's fine with the mentor role?
Specifically mentorship role. I don't think he mentioned anything about actual playing time. I don't think he gets a whole lot of playing time. I know from his information, I think he's about 20 minutes or so. He's not getting a whole lot of points. I mean, if you're looking... down this list of who we're talking about, I mean, these guys are going anywhere from about 12 points to 20 points a game, and he's maybe hitting 5 points a game. He's not a guy who's going to come in and make a bunch of shots for you, but he'll occasionally get you a big three-pointer. He's that guy who could kind of hang around the three-point line.
Okay, so the next player here is Rajon Rondo, and obviously Pelicans fans have a lot of different opinions about him. It seems like Pelicans fans are kind of split on whether he was really good for the Pelicans the year that we had him or just highly overrated So I'm curious what you all think, and I'm curious if you think Rondo is a fit here now.
I would say that the question of whether he's overrated is actually secondary to the role that he assumes on every single team he winds up being on. Rajon Rondo is someone extremely high IQ player, but also someone who has the ball in his hands a lot. And given the fact that we already have Drew and Lonzo for playmaking, Zion will give you a whole lot of secondary playmaking in a position that you don't typically get it. I think the worst thing you could do is bring someone who's got sticky hands and who's going to wind up being a highly controlled player, because he's someone who does like to control the offenses that he's on when he gets that opportunity. And as much as I think, again, I think he actually had, from what I understand, I thought he had a pretty positive effect on our locker room. I don't know if that's true, and I don't know if that really contradicts what was said previously of him sort of being a firecracker. And but I do think that he is someone who probably does not make a whole lot of sense on the court, and would probably be pretty upset he wasn't getting actual minutes for us.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at the perfect Jekyll and Hyde in basketball. There could be a guy who is leading you to, a playoff run, as playoff Rondo is always what he's called, whether it was with the Pelicans, with the Celtics, and even that small run that he had, I think, with Chicago until his injury went down. So I think he could be a mentor role for Zion and help him kind of develop. But again, you're bringing Rondo on with Lonzo Ball. Kind of bringing that same LA situation. So do you really want to bring that back into the mix? And is Rondo going to be that guy that you really want on the team, be in the mentorship role? I would say I would pass on it, but I'd be open, but pass.
That's a great point about Lonzo Ball there. I totally forgot, and they do really seem like they would contradict each other a little, or at least it would kind of stymie Lonzo Ball's growth in his number of minutes handling the basketball there. But you also made a great point about playoff Rondo. And if the Pelicans do surprise us this year and somehow, squeak in maybe as the 8th or 7th seed in the West, a playoff Rondo, you can say what you want about Rondo being here, whether he's a stat pad or whether he held on the ball too much or whatever. Regular season Rondo, he was just okay. But playoff Rondo was a really, really big deal at the time. So it's hard not to respect what he did for us in the playoffs, but at the same time, I just don't. Now that we got Lonzo Ball, I'm agreeing with you, Panaman. I just don't really see it here.
And I think the one other thing to say about Rondo and playoff Rondo is that even if we are in the playoffs, and even if he is truly going to be to that form, I think you're taking away valuable playoff minutes from other people who could probably benefit more from them. So I think, all in all, I agree with pretty much everything y'all have said, and I don't think it's the best fit.
Yeah. Speaking of playoffs, Nikola Mirotic also had a great run in the playoffs 2 years ago. He was essential in that Portland series, and he actually looked like one of the. Honestly, he was playing so well at the time that he and Drew and AD all looked like top 20 players in the NBA. That's how good Mirotic was in that game, in that series. But he was traded to the Milwaukee Bucks because we started the rebuild process a little early, and the Bucks needed him for what they thought was going to be a championship run. Now Mirotic is a free agent. Do you see a return to New Orleans happening?
I really liked him during his time here. I think he's someone who gets a little bit underrated based on his defense. People assume because he's not a highly mobile person that he's a terrible defender. I think he moves his feet better than he's given credit for, and I think he's a really smart team defender. Can he recover in a situation where he can't think it out and all of a sudden he has to react? Probably not to the level that you'd want from a modern four. I think his game complements Zion's really well on offense. I think if you ask me 4 or 5 years from now if a player sort of like Mirotic would fit with Zion, I think that would be the case. But I think given what he'll command, I think it makes more sense to invest in an actual 5 and not someone who would be a small ball 5. Because I think Zion, as much as he probably projects to be a small ball 5 at the end of games a few years from now, I really want a more traditional center, at least for the meantime. And if the guy can shoot, that's great. And I think that'll fit excellently. And Mirotic would certainly fit that bill. But Mirotic is not someone you want playing full-time center right now. And I think because of that, he's not my ideal target, albeit someone that I've always liked watching play.
Yeah, and I agree with most of that information. I mean, most people that go from a team and they're in free agency, they're usually going to try to go elsewhere. I mean, it's just sort of the way it is sometimes. But Mirotic now, he's, pretty much in his prime at 28, so he's going to command a lot more money than he, was getting with us. I mean, we were so thankful that Bobby Porter punched him in the face in Chicago, so that they had to separate the two basically like children, and kind of we got the better end of that deal. So that was awesome that we got him. It kind of makes you wonder, though, about their pace of play. If he would fit right back into that with that quick pop three that he had with us way behind the 3-point line. But again, is the money too much? Could we not go out and get a guy like Ariza and a Jared Dudley to kind of fit, those guys into that role and get two of those guys rather than one? Those are the kind of the things that, you gotta have to think about when you're thinking about cap room and thinking about, chemistry with the team. Is it worth it to have one of these guys or two of the guys that you could have that fit both of that role and still add to that, that points per game matching up with that? So that's definitely another question too.
I'm realizing right now how many of these players have played for the Pelicans or even the New Orleans Hornets back in the day. Ariza, way long time ago. He's played everywhere, though. Lopez, we talked about. Rondo, we talked about Mirotic. And now we're going to talk about Al-Farouq Aminu, who also played here. And so he's been kind of a role player and a bench player in Portland, but he's actually been pretty good, right? I mean, actually, he might even start there, but what I mean by that is he's not somebody they rely on scoring, but he's going to get you, 10 points and 7 rebounds a night. And he's been pretty good for Portland over the years. Is he somebody that is probably going to test the waters in free agency and maybe come to New Orleans, or we're passing here? What do y'all think?
I'm not particularly interested in him. He's someone who, if you watched him earlier in his career, you never would have expected him to develop anything resembling a 3-point shot that was respectable.
Exactly.
And it still kind of isn't. I know he shot decent percentages the last 2 years, but it's on a relatively low volume. I'd say that the 2 per game he scored, or 1.8 per game he scored from 3 2 years ago, was a fairly respectable mark, but it's not something I expect to continue. I think it goes all over the place. And if you remember from that series that we played with Portland, even though Aminu was good in the regular season from 3, he was someone that we consistently left wide open, and that's for a reason. Even if he's canning those shots, there's a reason you're steering the ball to him. I think that we have enough wings on this team. I wouldn't hate it, but I also wouldn't want to spend anything more, because I think at this point he is who he is. He rebounds pretty well for his position. He's not someone who generates steals or blocks at a particularly high level, given what you would have thought in his athleticism. So not someone I would absolutely hate, but not really someone that I have a whole lot of interest in.
Yeah, I mean, I watched him a lot, especially when he played for New Orleans and then his time at Dallas and then in Portland. He's definitely a guy to fill kind of your roster right there in the middle at the shooting forward or the small forward position. He'll give you some hustle plays and eventually give you a couple of 3-pointers every once in a while. I don't think he's that exciting. He's been on the team before. I would definitely pass on this.
And yeah, he's got that rainbow 3 or that rainbow shot, if I remember correctly. It's got that really high arcing shot there. But Dwayne Dedmon, the center for the Atlanta Hawks here, and Michael, you just mentioned a couple minutes ago in this podcast that you were looking more for a traditional center to play with Zion Williamson, and obviously, we have that in Jackson Hayes, but we don't really know if he's ready to start yet. And if we sign the first center that y'all said that y'all liked on this list is Robin Lopez, and if we sign him, I don't really feel that comfortable with Robin Lopez as a starting center for your NBA team at this point in his career. But Dwayne Dedmon's shown some potential with the Hawks in the past. What do you think about him coming to New Orleans?
I certainly think that he's a better player than Lopez is at this juncture, and what he really offers beyond what Lopez offers is he's someone who can actually space the floor. He was playing with the Spurs. He actually hadn't ever taken really any threes until 2 years ago, and all of a sudden he's jacking 3.3 per 36 minutes. Last year, 5 per 36 minutes, albeit in limited minutes. He wasn't playing 36 minutes a night or anything, but I think he would have played a whole lot more was he playing on a team that actually wanted to win consistently. He was on a younger team that really didn't need him for those purposes. I think that ultimately he is someone that I would be interested in, and I think you mentioned Lopez. I think Lopez is probably better than you're giving him credit for, but I do think that Dedmon's a better player and certainly someone that I think that the Pelicans should be interested in.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think he's the right guy for our team. I remember him for the San Antonio Spurs, so he's definitely got some good coaching under him with Popovich. But one of the things that happens with that team is sometimes they will kind of coach guys up and they'll go out and they're just not, what they were being coached under Popovich. And so you're looking at the Atlanta roster, who's basically depleted until they got Trae Young and a few other guys, but they wanted John Collins there at center, and they're pretty much saying that he can go into free agency. They're not worried about Dedmon, and I don't think we should be either. I think he's very low on this list of any of these guys that we've talked about.
Okay, I might have actually a. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say I actually must have misspoke there because I actually like Dedmon for us, but I can see.
Right, I was just about to say that's actually y'all's first real disagreement here, not an agreement here. So Michael is in favor of having Dedmon here to come into New Orleans Pelicans, and Piano Man, not about it right now. We'll see if the Pelicans show any interest in Dedmon this offseason. That's one of the players now that I'm pretty interested in to see where they end up now that y'all have a disagreement here. Patrick Beverley. One of my favorite players in the NBA for quite some time. I just love those small defensive talents here. If I had to guess, it seems like Patrick Beverley's going to go to a contender and kind of be one of those ring chasers or a team that maybe kind of needs him to just play defense and jack up the occasional three. But he has been a nuisance for many years. He gets under people's skins. He's one of the best defenders in the league. The Pelicans are putting an emphasis on defense, right, guys? I mean, the Pelicans are really drafting and signing players who are versatile and who are very capable defenders. So does Patrick Beverley fit the mold here and it just might not work out because he doesn't want to come here, or do y'all think this is a realistic fit?
No, I think you nailed it. I would expect that Beverley will go chasing a ring, and I think it's in his mentality. He's someone who's just an absolute terror on defense, someone who he's not afraid to check guys 6 or 7 inches taller than he is. I actually think I wouldn't be surprised at all if he wound up at least evaluating the possibility of playing for the Lakers. I think they would have some interest in him.
Here.
So
that's
I think
who I meant when I was going for the ring.
Yeah, I don't think I don't as much as I would like him here. I think he certainly fits the culture that you'd want to implement over here. But I don't think that we would be the right fit for him, and as such, I don't think we will wind up really giving him much of an offer.
Yeah, I think we have our second disagreement. I thought that you would want him on this team.
I do.
He does want.
You do want him. Okay.
No, I want him. I just don't think
Patrick
he wants.
Beverley doesn't want to be here.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So one of the things I think would be a huge headline is, especially looking at the Lonzo Ball issue, is that Lonzo Ball's very first day of the NBA, Patrick Beverley wanted to make a statement, and he was on him like white on rice the whole game, and just knocking him around, welcoming him to the NBA. So there might be a little bit of the tiff. I don't think that much of it, but I think a big thing, just like you guys were talking about with the Lakers, I think if they get Kawhi Leonard to go along with those guys, I think he'll go to them if they do that, because they won't have a whole lot of room, and he'll take less money to go there. So I think that could be a deciding factor if he goes there or another team based on that signing.
Yeah, I could easily see that happening. And another guy who may go to the Los Angeles Lakers if they can't, if they don't end up locking up Kawhi for whatever reason, is D'Angelo Russell, and he's kind of getting thrown out there on rumors right now because Brooklyn's also been interested in Kyrie Irving, and we're just not really sure where the dominoes are going to fall yet. But for whatever reason, even though D'Angelo Russell had a breakout year this year, it doesn't seem like Brooklyn is really all in on him, and I might be mistaken there, but it just based on their kind of actions, I'm not really sensing the idea that, okay, we really want D'Angelo Russell to be our franchise guy despite the breakout year. So what do y'all think about him hitting free agency, and do you think he's a possibility for the Pelicans, or do you think it stifles Lonzo Ball's growth too much?
My guess is that Brooklyn is somewhat interested in keeping him, but it's probably somewhat related to whether or not they're going to get Kyrie. I think so. They offered him the qualifying offer today, so he is in restricted free agency. But I do think, like you're saying, but I do think what you're saying is true. I don't think they're necessarily all in, regardless of that sort of action. So, as far as his fit here, I think that you have to be very careful about people who are on. I wouldn't call them awful team because they're actually all right, but he just had the ball in his hands so much. And again, I don't want players who have sticky hands on this team, and I think we have enough offensive options already. I think we could certainly use shooting, and he would offer that, but I don't think, given his price tag, that he would be the right kind of target. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him, like you said, consider the Lakers, but maybe also the Suns. I think the Suns would be a team. They've been hunting for a point guard for God knows how long. I wouldn't be shocked if they made an offer at him.
That's true.
I actually agree with that Suns point. I mean, one of the big parts of the trade, when they were trying to do a three-way trade involving the Pelicans and the Lakers, was one of the options was getting the Suns involved and getting out of that 6th pick and taking Lonzo Ball from the Lakers. So now they don't have that option, and they are really looking for somebody in order to keep Devin Booker on the Suns. So if the deal doesn't go down with LA, obviously, if they sign Kawhi, he's not going to LA, and if Brooklyn signs Kyrie, he's not going back to Brooklyn most likely. So where does that leave him to go? So I think he'll go to the Suns if all of those things happen. Again, does he fit with the Pelicans? I think he's a really good player, and I think in another world he would fit with us, but it's not the right time for that.
In another world. So basically, he would fit if it wasn't this scenario, so he doesn't fit, I would say.
I think... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I actually like the point that Piano Man was making earlier about getting more Lakers on this team. I think it was with Rondo that he was saying that, and D'Angelo Russell was a Laker at one point, and I don't really want anybody from that franchise. He might have rehabbed his image in Brooklyn, but I don't want any ex-Lakers in this locker room beyond the ones that we have. I think we really want to reset the culture, and I don't want to put a bunch of people in that situation.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was actually pretty surprised, a little off topic here, but I was pretty surprised when the Suns passed on Kobe White at 6th pick for Jared Culver when I was watching the draft, because like y'all said, and y'all both said it, the Suns have been looking for a point guard for so long, and one was sitting there right there. I guess they just didn't like him as much as they liked Culver, but I was surprised when that pick happened. But we can talk about the draft all day. Let's move on, continue with the list. Willie Cauley-Stein, Sacramento Kings right here. He's been the King, I think, his entire career, right? And he has always been, first couple seasons, he didn't really do much. But last year, he saw some playing time and was pretty good. 27 minutes, he had 12 points a game, 8 rebounds a game. And I know that they also have Bagley, who did well there. But Willie Cauley-Stein's kind of made a name for him now. Are we interested in somebody like him?
I don't think so. I think that Willie Cauley-Stein, it's my general opinion that most bigs, if you give them adequate minutes, will wind up putting pretty decent stats up. One, because just being proximate to the goal, they're going to get a lot of rebounds most of the time, unless they're tasked with doing something else. Like there are situations like with Steven Adams where he's boxing out specifically so that Russell Westbrook can grab and go. I think Cauley-Stein's someone who, to me, actually projects more as a backup, and I just don't think... Given where we are, and again, he's still fairly young, I don't really think he's the right player for us. It's just not the right fit for me.
Yeah, I agree. He just became pretty much a free agent because he said he wanted to go in a different direction from Sacramento. But, I mean, how many players have said that before? With his game, I mean, he had a decent year. Like you said, you gave his stats out about 12 and 8 a game. That's fine. I just don't know about guys coming from Sacramento, how well they're coached, how well that organization's run. Could that mean that we get a guy who we could, develop since they didn't do that great of a job developing him? Or is he just who he is? So I'm okay with sticking with like Jahlil Okafor and having Jackson Hayes there and kind of leaving this guy out. I'm not that interested.
Yeah, y'all are giving him the it's not you, it's me treatment. It's just not a good fit here. No, it's fine. Okay, so we're both in agreement there. So Rodney Hood, so Portland. And I want to also throw Seth Curry into this because they were both kind of role players for Portland. And I'm interested to see if either of them would be enticing options here for the Pelicans.
I say yes and no. So I would say yes to Curry. I would say no to Hood. Hood's someone who's always been a particularly inefficient player, someone who's a bit of a chucker, a better three-point shot than I probably am giving him credit for, but someone who, when I watch Rodney Hood play, it just feels like every single time he gets the ball, he's going to try to score. Someone who's just never really particularly impressed me as an actual basketball player, a good athlete with a good ability to score, but nothing really besides that. Someone who's generated almost no steals over the course of his career, certainly doesn't have the reputation as a good defender because steals aren't always a good indicator. But I just not the right fit. But so Seth Curry, on the other hand, I think is someone who, if you're looking for someone outside of a traditional point guard and someone to sort of just plug into an offense and honestly, I mean, just a phenomenal shooter. It's crazy to say this, but I mean, he's not on Steph Curry's level, but he is someone who, over the course of his career, has registered some pretty crazy percentages on a fairly high volume. Someone who can really space the floor, and I think has a very good understanding of the game. So I have much more of an interest in Seth Curry than I do in Rodney Hood.
I agree on the Rodney Hood portion of that. I think he tends to kind of overplay himself, and I think he gets disappeared into the bench, whether that was with Utah or Cleveland or anyone else. Seth Curry, I watched him a lot playing at Dallas in that kind of starter/backup kind of role. And I know his numbers last year are only at about 7.9 points per game, but the previous year, I think he is much higher than that. I think he kind of thrives in depending roles. And if you remember watching him in the playoffs against the Warriors,
right,
I mean, he was lighting it up, and he was playing tight defense and playing that. I mean, he was huge in that series. And just to remember, if you guys are listening and you're hearing this name and wondering if you've heard it before, even if you didn't know about him being Steph Curry's little brother, we actually had him on a practice squad. We were able to go ahead and sign him years ago, and we decided not to do it. And I think I thought it was a mistake back then. I thought he was a quality guy, obviously not going to be anywhere near Steph, but somebody who can give you maybe 10 to 12 points a game. I think he's grown a lot since then, and I think he's starting to become that 12 to 15 point player a game. I'd like to have him, but I think he's going to command more money since he's been doing so well.
You could be right about that, Piano Man, but I think we do need a little more, because Lonzo obviously doesn't have a three-point shot. I think Drew, can shoot a three, but shooting's not his long-range shooting isn't his forte. And Zion, it's to be determined whether he's going to be able to shoot an NBA three really well. If he can, it's not going to probably be in his rookie year. So I think we could actually use a three-point kind of sniper here. And so Seth Curry is one of the targets that y'all mentioned. Y'all both mentioned that he'd be a good fit. That's one of the ones that I'm going to throw my third agreement on there, because I really like the fit here for Seth Curry. I hope we can try to get a deal done. And it seems like he would get a fair amount of playing time. I know on some teams he has been kind of, like you mentioned, disappearing to the bench occasionally. He's been inconsistent. But it seems like he'd have a pretty set role here. And so I'm all on board for the Seth Curry train. Let's go to Brook Lopez. We've already talked about Robin Lopez, but we have Brook Lopez here. He had a really good year in Milwaukee, and obviously they made it far in the playoffs. What do you think about the older brother of Robin here? Is he as good of a fit that y'all both said Robin would be?
I actually think so. In my opinion, Brook Lopez should be our number one target. I don't think he's going to command enough money to justify. I don't think he's going to take up all of our cap or anything like that. I think you would probably have to overpay him a little bit, at least past what Milwaukee would be able to fit him into. They won't have bird rights on him. I think if you're looking at players that I want, one, Brook Lopez is a guy who has a traditional back-to-the-basket game in addition to the three-point shot that he's really developed over the last 3 years. Someone who hoists a whole lot of shots, 7 or 8 per 36 minutes, which is a whole lot, and who also just gladly accepted a lower usage role in Milwaukee and really thrived in it. He's not a great defensive rebounder. He's someone who would probably be more effective boxing out than anything, but there's actually value in that. I think we have a lot of guys that are grab-and-go guys. Zion's going to be a guy who can defend, who can grab a defensive rebound and go with it, and so is Lonzo. They're both particularly good defensive rebounders for their position, so I think some of that is mitigated through that. And then I also think, just having that sort of space, but also having someone who, on a switch, can basically punish someone in the post, who can thrive in a higher usage role if he needs to, because a guy who's averaging over 20 points per 36 minutes for most of his career, very skilled, very smart, and I think is sort of the right nexus of affordability and productivity that we would want for the Pelicans.
Yeah, I kind of have mixed emotions about this because obviously I think he's way better than Robin Lopez. But you have to think about their center situation. So they just opted back into Jahlil Okafor and they drafted Jackson Hayes. So if you bring Brook Lopez in, where does he fit with the other three guys? Is he going to be the starter?
Like he starts.
Right.
Yeah.
He would start, and then you would also have Jahlil Okafor in the back end and develop Jackson Hayes. If they would do that, I'm fine with that. But do they really want Jahlil Okafor to kind of be in this mix, or is he somebody that we can go ahead and say that he'll be gone next year and we'll just keep on with Brook Lopez?
I fully expect so. I think it's a good point. I think it's the right question to raise. My understanding of all of this is that I think Jackson Hayes is more of a long-term prospect, and I think that you want to sort of ease him into minutes, probably give him a little bit of time to fill out his frame before you put him in there for 20, 25 a night. I think Jahlil Okafor was purely picked up because he wound up being pretty good last year, but he actually sat a lot at the end of last year as well, and even when we really weren't doing particularly well and even when we weren't trying to win necessarily, I think at this point, Jahlil Okafor, like you're saying, I think he's gone after next year. I think if we wind up having injuries and Jahlil Okafor has to step in for 15, 20 minutes a night, I'm fine with that at this juncture. I think that Brook Lopez would be the de facto starter and probably be playing between 25 and 32 minutes a night, and I'm actually okay with that. I like that a lot, and I think that's the kind of role that I would be willing to overpay him on because I think he is a very good player, and I also think he's a good locker room presence. And again, I think he's the right nexus, the word I use. I really do think it's the combination of productivity and affordability that I would want. He's not going to take up all of our cap room, but he's also going to give us a whole lot. So I really think he's a good option for the Pelicans.
He is that combination that would actually help us win some games for sure, but not to actually put us in championship contention. And, you know how the NBA is. If the Pelicans are out of contention in the last, I don't know, let's say 10 to 15 games, we can always just make up an injury and then have him sit and have Jackson Hayes play for the last 10 games to get him valuable minutes on the court. So it's not like just because Brook Lopez comes that Jackson Hayes, won't get his time on the court. If the Pelicans are out of contention, you can always make that happen. Oh no, he sprained his ankle. What a shame. You know how that stuff works. So, I'm on Brook Lopez here. I like it better than the Robin Lopez situation that y'all mentioned up there, even though obviously it comes with a higher price tag. Let's skip one down just to Frank. Let's hit Frank Kaminsky real quick because I want to talk about both Elfrid Payton and Julius Randle last. I want to close with them because those are obviously some popular names here, and I think we might have different opinions on that. So let's talk about Frank Kaminsky here because I know Fletcher Mackel throws a bunch of trade scenarios out there on Twitter and hoping something sticks, and sometimes he gets it right and sometimes he gets it wrong. But he's mentioned Frank Kaminsky a couple times I've been seeing, and he's kind of convincing me that it might make sense here because he is still young at 26, and we kind of know what he is at this point. Do y'all think Frank Kaminsky's a good fit here or no?
I'm sort of male on it. I don't think he's necessarily a bad option, and I don't think he's a particularly good option. He's someone that I would be okay with, and I would be all right, but I don't really think there's a high ceiling there. I think he could wind up being a good floor spacer, but I think at this point, guys who space the floor and don't do a whole lot else, especially at that big position and when they are immobile defensively, I really don't think they're worth investing in a whole lot. I mean, again, I think he's an okay player. I don't think he destroys your team. I don't think he helps it a whole lot. So if we sign him, I'm not going to be crying about it, but he's not someone that I would put a lot of hopes in.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's definitely a guy who's going to space the floor, but again, is he going to be as effective as like a Brook Lopez or somebody in that kind of role? No, he's going to come a lot cheaper. So if you need somebody to fill in, like if you've got a bunch of injuries, I think he's an okay guy to sign for like a 1-year deal just as a rental kind of situation. But yeah, I wouldn't look more than that.
It doesn't seem like there's that much of an appeal. It doesn't seem like there's that much of a motive or reason to actually go out and make a move to get this guy, other than the fact that you can just throw him in there immediately and you know what you have. If y'all aren't seeing the long-term upside, then it seems like a pass. So let's move on to our last two on this list, and I want to talk about both Elfrid Payton and Julius Randle here. So Elfrid Payton, obviously our point guard last year, was hurt for a lot of the year, but he really finished the season strongly, at least from a statistical perspective. And Michael and I have discussed at length on this podcast that just because he was racking up triple-doubles doesn't mean that he was necessarily extremely efficient or, being that great. And he was in a stat padding situation at the end. But, we're not going to take away all of it from him. He was trying hard at the end of the season. I respect that. And he's also somebody who could maybe take a hometown discount or maybe come more affordable. At the counter, of course, is that we have Lonzo Ball. And then before we get into Julius Randle, we drafted Zion, who also plays the same position as Julius Randle. But Julius Randle is also a guy I think could maybe work with Zion. I'll leave that to y'all to decide. But both of these players, I'm really interested in what y'all think about them because I feel like we have a stronger chance to sign them, if for no other reason than the fact that they were Pelicans last year and, they know the organization. We're familiar with them, and they're both quality players that we wouldn't really have to break the bank for, maybe a little for Randle, but especially from Peyton's perspective, both quality players. Not great ones, but quality young guys that we wouldn't have to break the bank for. So are they in that little range that you are talking about that I think Michael used a great word for it, that kind of that balance that we're looking for, where we want an experienced and good player, but also a veteran, but also somebody who's not going to take a lot of touches away? Or are we just not interested? What do y'all think about Elfrid Payton and Julius Randle?
I'll start with Elfrid. I think Elfrid's a much more feasible option for us. I do think that a lot of the stats he's putting up at the end of the season were not particularly great. Honestly, I should say that the stats were great. I wasn't thinking that the performances were that great. We were losing a lot of games at that point. I think that if you told me that we were going to bring back Elfrid Payton on a reasonable contract, we don't have bird rights on him. We don't have bird rights on Randle, so that's certainly factoring into the consideration here. But I don't think that Elfrid Payton showed me enough to really get me excited about anything. I think I'd be happy with him in a backup role. I don't think he's good enough to be a starter right now. Again, he's young enough to where it could change, but at this juncture, I don't think that's the case. And I prefer Lonzo Ball, honestly. I think Lonzo Ball is a better fit for today's NBA than Elfrid Payton is. And
yeah, but Michael, do you think – I'm not suggesting that Elfrid Payton – I know I kind of talked him up there, but I'm not suggesting he would start over Ball. I think Ball is a much better player than Payton. But you wouldn't be interested in him as a backup point guard?
I'd be fine with him. It wouldn't really make me happy or sad. I don't buy enough into having hometown players. I think that you're correct in questioning whether or not he would take a hometown discount. My guess is no, just because if you're going to play yourself into a bigger contract than you earned last year, I think you're going to wind up going for minutes and opportunity rather than trying to stay in your hometown. So I don't think that would be the case. And as far as Randle goes, I'll leave it at this. I actually think Randle is probably one of my favorite players to watch, despite sort of being opposite of what I typically look for in players. I think he's just a bull in a china shop. He's extremely aggressive, and I think that'll serve him wherever he goes. But I think he'll wind up commanding a bigger contract than I'm willing to give him. And I think, one, given that he's already been with some of these players over in L.A., and then two, I just don't think – I think he's a guy who has too many touches. I know he gets up and down the floor, and I know he sort of fits the athleticism profile they're looking for, but I don't think he's the right fit. I think he needs the ball too much.
Yeah, I agree pretty much almost on both of these guys. I think Elfrid Payton, if he wants to be a backup and play here behind Lonzo Ball, that's fine. I don't think he would probably want to do that. I think he's an okay player. I think the triple-double stats, I really don't like them a whole lot unless it's somebody like a Giannis or LeBron. I watch Westbrook so much and these triple-doubles that he does every night, and it's hustling, yeah, but sometimes it's overplay and just trying to get those stats. I'm not really... I'm not really into that stat as something that I want to have somebody to say, hey, that's an awesome stat. I need a guy who can do all those kind of things. So Julius Randle, I would actually say that if we didn't draft Zion, if we didn't have an opportunity to get him, I would want to keep him. But he's basically a similar type of player. Zion's obviously younger. He's not going to be as aggressive as Julius Randle until a few years. But I would want him only if we didn't draft him. But we have him, so it's kind of having two of the same type of guys. And, he's going to command too much on the market. So he's probably gone anyway. He probably already had his sights on somewhere else already anyway.
Okay, so we're more sour on Elfrid Payton and Julius Randle than I thought y'all would be. Before we end the podcast, do y'all have any other free agents that we haven't listed that maybe are either lesser names that just weren't listed tonight that y'all think might be good role players or good fits for the Pelicans?
I mean, for me, I haven't really given a whole lot of I guess I haven't picked out a whole lot of players besides the ones that I have at the top, because for me, I think most of the players are somewhat interchangeable in the NBA. So for me, it's getting those top guys. And to me, the guy that I want the most is Brook Lopez, and I think that's what they should be doing, if not someone like Dwayne Dedmon. So that's sort of how I look at it. Seth Curry, we talked about. Jared Dudley, I would be okay with Ariza, those kind of players. And I think it would be some combination of those. And those are the guys that really were at the top of my list. Again, Brook Lopez, definitely the top. Dwayne Dedmon probably after that. I think that's how I'd want to do it. And I don't think there's any rush to use every single ounce of cap space. I think typically what happens, especially in a period where a lot of teams have a lot of cap space, what you want to do is if you have your guys, you might overpay for them a little bit. But then once you do that, you should just sit tight and then just wait for everybody to spend all their money and then wait on the other people who slip through the cracks. Because you're not trying to spend all your money just to spend it. You will wind up paying it because you have to pay basically to the salary cap, to the soft cap. Even if you don't have players on the roster, you just divide it evenly between the players. But in terms of actually taking up your cap room, the last thing you want to do is lock into some contract just because you have money to spend. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, the only guy I would kind of want to look at outside of this list, obviously, well, there might be two. One would be Nikola Vucevic. I think he's going to re-sign with Orlando, though. I think he's a kind of like a Brook Lopez type of deal where he can shoot outside, but he can also back some people in. I don't think we're getting him. But the other guy I would definitely strongly look at is Kevon Looney from the Golden State Warriors. He's a guy who came in and really backed up the 4 and 5 position for the Warriors. He had to play some huge minutes and some huge roles. So he's got a lot of championship experience, and we want some guys who are going to be able to give us some of that experience down the line if we do, find a way to make it that far. And I think he could be a real good backup to, when Zion's out or if Jahlil Okafor or whoever playing is that center spot, they could really give us some good backup minutes, maybe 10 to 15 minutes a game.
Yeah, I think that's
a good point. Michael, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think Looney's a good target. I think I was actually surprised at how good he was defending the perimeter despite being so big. Like Dixon was saying, I think it makes sense that he can back up both spots in the front court. Someone who does have, I do think that there's probably more championship pedigree in those top players, and I think you would probably agree with that. But I do think that there is something to say about a guy who has been around winners, like you're saying, and someone like Kevon Looney has certainly been around those. So I think it makes some sense. Backup minutes is what I project for him if we do wind up getting him, and he is someone who makes sense to look at.
So those are the names to keep an eye out on, folks. We mentioned Robin Lopez, Jared Dudley as mentor players. We mentioned Nikolai Mirotic. We mentioned Dwayne Dedmon, Brook Lopez, Seth Curry were two prospects that Jonathan and Michael were both really into. And then Kevon Looney here is the last target we're talking about. I thought Michael and Piano Man did such a great job in today's episode breaking down the potential free agents for the New Orleans Pelicans, and that's going to wrap it up. You can find us on all social media at Best Podcast NOLA. Don't forget to sign in to Apple and give us a great rating on iTunes. We'll be back next week. Tell all your friends, who dat, and let's dance.